Hi, my name is Richa S Mukherjee. I'm an author based in Mumbai, and today I will be conducting this panel for the Women's Writers Fest. As you all must already know, Women's Writers Fest is a wonderful platform that has been hosting very engaging and important conversations across the length and breadth of India over the past many years now. And today I am additionally delighted to be in conversation with friends and fellow authors who really need no introduction, but yet I'm going to go ahead and introduce them because I have peppered the introduction with some additional tidbits. So, Andaleeb Wajib is a prolific writer who has 40 books to her credit. I did not get that number wrong. 40 books to her credit across young adult, romance, and horror. You must read her horror books. They're wonderful. She writes the most wonderful characters, and I personally believe that she should be in the Guinness Book of World Records for the number of books she churns out in the shortest amount of time. The Jasmine Miller series is her latest and my favorite. Milan Vohra is a TEDx speaker, a fellow advertising professional, and a writer of exceptional caliber. Milan has written several books such as The Love Asan, TikTok with 30, and Our Song, which is one of my favorites. Anmol Malik is the author of much loved rom-coms such as Three Impossible Wishes, A Plain Story. This exceptionally talented lady is a gifted singer and musician as well. She's known to have her readers wrapped around her pinky with the way she writes about love, hope, and second chances. Oh, and of course, she has gorgeous hair and start this conversation today. So, we will be speaking about something that most of us abhor, but we cannot avoid. We're talking about change. We're talking about the changing world, changing beliefs, changing ideologies. Uh, you know, a major change in the way just people think and regard the people around them. And as a result of this, all of this percolates down into our writing and the way readers assess what we write as well. So, we're going to be talking about writing about romance in the age of a lot of change, and social media is one of the aspects as well. So, just to put things in context, now romance is one of the genres that has, that clocks in about $1.44 billion of revenue. These are figures from last year. And growth is not a term which is associated with the publishing industry, which all or everybody I'm sitting with here, would empathize with. But this genre has just been defeating everything that the trade pundits have been saying, and it is the highest earning genre of fiction, and it's been growing year on year. Including the years of the pandemic. So clearly something's happening here. While all of fiction is struggling, romance is the only one, I think, the only genre that has readers and publishers alike, leaving them with starry eyes. Now, while all of this sounds rosy on one end of the table, what is not easy, and I appreciate this because I write as well, is somehow in this kind of environment, getting the right voices, the right characters, the right stories, the right representations to appease and, a genre where readers, why just this genre? I think readers generally have become more demanding. They're a little cynical, they're a little temperamental, and it's very hard to understand, what makes them happy or which story will be to their liking. In such a scenario, today we shall be discussing how the changing world looks from a writer's perspective. You take a look at the best-selling titles around the world in terms of sales, in terms of popularity, and the first 8 to 9 spots are all taken up by women. Now, naturally, historically, women with the sensitive, nuanced, imaginative way, that women write, it lends itself to romance. But clearly, that aside, there is something wonderful happening here. So, what do you think? What is happening here? How are these authors? How are you guys managing to write for this changing world with contemporarization, with relevance? And what is the homework that goes into this, or is it absolutely organic and you're not even bothered about how this changing world is impacting your writing?
So I think the first thing is, how we taking cognizance of what's changing is really first of all in your character, right? The world that the character lives in, and you can't be writing in isolation. So for example, for me, since you touched upon the Mills and Boone, which I really hope was long behind me, but it keeps popping up. But it's a good example to begin with. When I wrote that book in 2010, and it was with Harlequin UK and with what they believe really works for them, and it is almost like franchise writing, which I realized once I had kind of jumped on board. I realized that when I looked at the book several years later, and this was in the pandemic, some of the things that were happening there just didn't sit well with me. The fact that in the world of Harlequin, you could have a marriage of convenience, and you could have a guy who could arm twist a woman into agreeing to something like that. And the fact is that emotional pressures and all of that doesn't change, but what agency is available to a woman of the post pandemic, or of current times, that has changed. And so for me, that book, for example, that book is a great example of how I could make sure it reflected that by taking the rights back, rewriting that, and writing the heroine in the context of Me Too. So today's heroine is not going to say, you can force me into this, and she says, I can go out and I can talk to the media right now, and say what you were suggesting right now. So I think that is pretty much one way of saying, you're always factoring in the changes that are happening in our context.
Sure, sure. Andali, would you like to comment?
I think Milan summed it pretty well. There is a lot of change happening, like you mentioned, across the world, and in the books, in the world of books, in the world of reading. I think readers expect certain things now. Things which were taken for granted earlier, like. Like Milan mentioned, this whole marriage of convenience, which is actually even today, it's like a very popular trope. Um, in romance literature. But at the same time, I feel that all marriages are marriages of convenience. So I mean, someone's convenience, the man's convenience. Someone is it's serving some purpose for someone at the end of it. So I think what romance does, it packages all this in a way that readers can romanticize about this. So that I feel has changed in a way that people expect more. Where like Milan said, like a heroine earlier would stay quiet about if she was being threatened or blackmailed into marrying someone, no matter how handsome he is. But today she is going to, like, fight back. So there is a change, there is a positive change. I think it also comes from writers being tuned in to the world. Like she said, you can't write in isolation. You have to be aware of what's happening around you. But at the same time, I also see that there is a lot of popular writing which happens, specifically especially internationally. You see there's a huge surge in writing, where there are some very worrying concepts. Okay, like there is a subset of romance called bully romances, where the hero is a bully. I mean, that's like an accepted trope, which I find very. I can't wrap my head around it. So, although we can't write in isolation, I feel that there are times when it helps for me to write in a bubble of my own, where I try to, I mean, my romances, I would say they are not really, they're pretty old school. There might be a lot of, um, spicy stuff happening, but it's still at the base of it, the romance itself is pretty old school. What they're reading, to have that feeling that, they are a part of this world for this very brief time and they're taking something back from it.
I really enjoyed the spicy scenes because it was just I was recently listening to this whole Hotel by Arthur Haley, and I was working out at the time. And even though he writes so beautifully, this whole question about the male and the female gaze, and when women write scenes, and when men write those the steamy scenes, the language and the voice is so different. Like it really stands out. Anmol, would you like to comment as well?
Um, so honestly, I don't know what more I can add because these answers have been absolutely spectacular. Uh, but Andalib Ji just said that her sense of romance is old school. But here's the thing: there's nothing better than the classics, and that is why a Pride and Prejudice still holds up, and you still have reworkings of it, because I think in a lot of ways there is change, but it's still just saying the same thing over and over again. For example, consent has always been sexy through the ages. It's just that maybe we say it in a different way now. Otherwise, again, Darcy wouldn't be the absolute prototype for most romances. But I love the genre of romances, and I'll tell you why. Because I find it's like a snapshot of the current time that we're living in. If I watch, and I'm sorry, I will quote a few movies because my background mostly stems from screenplays. And I will come down to this later about how dialogue is so important for me because it just gives away so much about the character. But when I look at, say, a certain movie, if I look at, say, Dilwale Dulhania Le Jayenge, or I look at, Confessions of a Shopaholic, or The Holiday, or Notting Hill, I will see the world as it was in that period of time. And I think that is why I like writing romances, because when you see a boy and you see a girl and you follow their story, you're not just following their journey, you're also seeing the world around them. I'll give you an example. So Three Impossible Wishes is set in 2008. And it's a very simple story of a girl who just wants to pass her exams and she's absolutely failing. And she does a bit of jugaad to kind of do something to help her with the exam. But in that very simple process, you kind of see what else was happening in the year 2008, which was your global financial crash, which was immigration laws getting tighter, which was, the Mumbai attacks. And you see the economical and the political upheavals and how it affects daily lives of very normal people. And this genre allows me to see the world through rose tinted glasses. So that is why I enjoy writing this. And yeah, I don't think the change is so prominent. I think it's always been there in the background, but we're just building on the classics.
Representation of the present, right? Representation of the world we live in. I can talk about, for example, tech, language, social media, Snapchat, which is pretty much prevalent everywhere, and everybody's stuck their faces in it all day long. uh, do you think that integrating all of this into your stories at some point, and this could be across your genres, uh, does it make your story more believable, and does their exclusion then mean an inauthentic representation of the world we live in? For example, I mean, you especially write a lot of young adult stories, so the mere fact that all of these aspects are so integrated into, teenagers and young adult readers, uh, do you think their inclusion is will add lend that air of authenticity to your story, or do you think that love is so universal that it is not beholden to these specifics?
No, I mean, you can't obviously. So, if it really depends on your setting, like Anmol mentioned, represents the time period you're living in. I also feel that it kind of becomes important. You can't just talk about a story in isolation, especially when technology keeps advancing, it keeps evolving so much. And what I like to do is I try not to go into the specifics, because I don't want my story to be dated. Like my young adult novel Asmara Summer came out in 2016, and it's popular even now. Like 7 years later, people still read it. And the thing is that when you use certain slang, when you use certain things, it kind of dates the story. But at the bottom of it, at the end, at the the core of it, the love story, it kind of that is what remains with people. Especially when you're writing romance, if you're writing for young adults, it's a very tricky slope, I would say, because writing for young adults is not easy. I think a lot of people assume that they can. I think a lot of people feel that they can write it because it reads very easily, But I think for me, I find it very comforting to slip back into that voice. For some reason, I kind of, my mind is. It seems to work better when I'm writing YA on those aspects. But remember that the core of the story is the emotion, especially if you're writing romance. you know these things are the extra trimmings, the what it kind of it adds depth to the story in a way that makes it relatable to the target audience. Like if I'm writing a story for young adults, and obviously social media is going to play a huge role in it. So those things, so it makes it relatable for them in a way that, that they can identify with it. But apart from that, I think for me, the core thing is the emotional depth of the story more than anything else.
Whether we realize it or not, everything we're writing is going to be part of a time capsule. And of course, the times we live in vary widely depending on what we've chosen, like you did with Kanpur Khufia Express. You chose to reflect a part of India, a certain kind of couple. So that's something that we choose, saying this is my character, this is the situation. But I think the formats that we take are only going to add fun to that basic overall theme that somebody buys into. For example, if you think of You've Got Mail, where your characters, the real characters, actually don't meet right until the end of the film. And if you look at a book that was very popular, I think last year was The Flatmate, where your two characters are sharing an apartment, and they're in and out. They're leaving post-its on the fridge all the time. They're communicating by text, but they never actually meet until much later. So if you look at it, those are decades apart. But the magic is
Exactly.
in the
No,
fact that
and exactly. And but somehow the realities, and when you're thinking of them, it makes you so cynical. Like for example, I was watching the series called You, which is all about how this guy stalks everyone online. And if somebody is oblivious of specifics about somebody's life, you're looking at them and wondering, why didn't he just like look her up? He could have. This is information is easily accessible. So you're constantly
exactly.
battling with this kind of logic in your head, which
And your
is
reader is going to do that. Reader or viewer is always going to say, whereas earlier all you had to think of were things like, why didn't they just iron out? If there's something that's kind of keeping two people who are romantically interested, what's keeping them apart from their inner trauma and past experiences. Like, why couldn't they just talk about it? But today you could say, like, she could have just found this out, or he could have just checked this up. And you've got so many platforms, and your reader is going to say that. So unless you've built in some kind of a character trait where the person is completely averse, or he's been some secret agent and is always undercover, and therefore there's nothing available. But you've got to say that I will have people saying logical things like they could have found this out so much easier in a different way. So that's one thing. And then again, I think that you have to keep coming back to what is holding the story together. And the story together, the tools that you use are just adding to the fun of making it contemporary and relatable. For example, there's a standalone book that I had brought out, which is called Mates, Dates, and Takes, in which I decided to write the entire story through text messages. And the fun is in the fact that it is actually still about a triangle. It is about three characters and what's unfolding in that situation where they've gone out on a blind double date. And so the fun is in that core story, but the format and the tools that we used just made it very lent themselves to the reader. Also, the fact that I'm talking to young adults who are constantly texting, whose fingers are constantly moving so fast on the phone, who would sit under a table and be texting, who could be talking to somebody and still their fingers are moving. So that just is just a tool that helps me make it more relatable and true to the characters.
fair enough.
Yeah.
Um, Anmol, since you were mentioning about classic romances and how they're so universal in their appeal, everybody there are plenty of assumptions, and everyone's trying to get it right. In terms of understanding what is it that readers prefer and what they like. Now there are two kinds of very clear classifications in my head. There's the pure, warms the cockles of the heart kind of romances. Victorian romances sunk their teeth into me when I was a child, and I don't think I've been able to pry the mouth open. I'm still pretty much in love. And then there are the sorts that E.L. James and Anne Huang writes, which are hot and steamy, and it's a growing genre. And like Andaleeb was mentioning, there's bully romances as well. So there is a reality that there is a whole bunch of people, and this kind of writing is creating traction as well. So, do you think that there's a natural, I guess, gravitation towards reading this kind of romance, or do you think that there's, enough enough people and readers in the world who would read either, and they each have their own space and set of readers?
Um, I think there is enough space for every type of writing out there to do well and have its own audience. Um, but honestly, when I sit down to write, it does sound a little selfish. But I find that I can't write if I think of too many opinions. I end up then trying to I think my writing starts sounding like something it's not. So my first draft is usually what I want to read. It may not be something anybody wants to read. It may go straight to the bin, but I find that that's where I find the story, because that's where I follow whatever I've picked up along the way. All my teachers, all my professors, every book that I've read, every author that I've spoken to, all those lessons kind of filter down into that first draft, and it becomes the story that I want to tell. And then it obviously passes through the rounds that it needs to between friends and editors, and becomes the story that finally gets published. But there are very many genres out there of romance. A lot of sub genres have now evolved, and I think there is an audience for a lot of them. Whether that's a good thing or not, it can be a bit alarming, some of them. But I mean, to each their own. But I do find that I gravitate a lot. Like, I would love to write the Victorian romances that you spoke about, but I don't think I have that kind of experience. And the kind of writing that I tend to gravitate towards, or the voices I gravitate towards, are more in the snarky, tongue-in-cheek, a bit Bridget Jones's Diary, or just very just cheeky stuff that's actually talking about very serious issues. There's a bit of gravity running through it, but they're saying it in such a cheeky way that you can't help but just find it very easy to read. I think that's the kind of stuff I gravitate towards.
Sure. Milan, would you like to comment on this? Consent, gender identity. When you're writing a story, I mean, any one of you could answer this first. Do you ever do this with trepidation? Because wondering if the inclusion of these, with the best of intentions, could be considered as, tokenism or just perfunctory when you're actually trying to integrate it into your story, because people have opinions about anything, and even you drawing air these days. And these are matters on which society itself is very deeply polarized. So are you, conscious of offending people, or do you think that does your belief in your story supersede all of that? So how do you deal with these topics in your stories? Anyone can go first.
And I think in that one of the hero was this. So there was this transgender character, which they drew a lot of flack for that, because ek to the it was not played by a transgender person, and I think they used that as a sort of shock value or something. I don't remember the name of this, but so those kind of things, I think it's become old now. I think
People
readers,
see through it. I guess people see through it when it's
yeah,
not
yeah, yeah,
genuine.
and you can't use these things as a sort of shock value, or try to create some sort of interest in the story. I think readers will see through it, like you said.
Sure. Miran and Anmol, would you like to add anything?
I do.
I'd like to add that I think that for me, the fact is that there are many things that I believe we can write about without the lived experience. And you're a fine example, Richa. We're writing about murders, and
Correct.
one is assuming you haven't said let's first do a trial run on it, and then I'll write about it, whatever. But particularly things like sexual identity, I think that it's important to be sensitive, and therefore if I feel that I haven't understood what that character has been through, I really wouldn't want to presume and write that. It's only for that reason, because we owe it to the people who have been through so much, to be represented right. So it's okay for me to write a character that I might know who is from the LGBTQ community, and say, okay, this this is the way I see it. For example, in TikTok with 30 Parzan is often for a long time seen as somebody who could possibly be the person our heroine ends up with. And I think there it was a very conscious choice to make sure that he appears as normal as anybody else, and not to stereotype him and give him any kind of um, anything that was coming from the old way of writing a gay character. So it's only much later that that it comes out, and so, and it's nothing to do with, it's only for the fact that they assume that that Lara or he may be hooking up. But it was important to show him as a normal person, which is the case with so many of the friends that we have who are of a different identity from us. So that's okay, but I would never want to write that as a central character, because I believe that I'm not qualified to do so.
Yeah, and you're
And
so right. It's sure, Anmol, go on.
I do agree also with what Andaleeb said, that readers are smart. They know what they want to read, and they are very honest with their feedback, and they can see through something that isn't authentic. So I think in my case, readers have been pretty kind, and they have kind of connected with the work, and that is something that I'm very grateful for, because at the end of the day, when you hear back from readers about your own work, it's eye opening, because they see things about your work that you probably hadn't even thought of when you were writing it. And on the whole, love is sensitive in all its forms. Even when you are writing about it, I think it is your duty to treat love sensitively, just with a bit more of kindness and gentleness. And that is, I think, going to be the underlying theme always, even in this regard.
That's so true. I mean, snippets of everything you all have said resonated so much because, like Milan, you were mentioning about, authentic representation, and that is what matters. Like when I'm writing about certain communities, I think I'm a sucker for punishment because I challenge myself and pick different communities around India because I tend to write about different social milieux all across, the country. So when I'm writing about Sindhis and excess baggage, that's my primary, goal. Understanding, the history, whether it not or not reflects in my story directly or indirectly, being authentic to that community. Or if I'm writing about, UP, or if I'm writing about, in Curse of Kuldhara, I was talking about the Marwadis, getting that bit of the history right. So I think that is first and foremost. And then after that, like Anmol said, what you write, and when it leaves, when it leaves your domain, people imbue so much additional meaning, and they see the world with their own lens, and then they add. I remember there was something I had written in Kanpur Khufia, and when it came back to me, somebody had reviewed it in the Hindu and said that she has spoken about the human condition. I had spoken of no such thing. I was speaking about a cow, and how it was behaving like a dog, and I don't know what, because at the end of it, we just have to accept that we live in a world, I think, and that is not just true of today. It's forever been this way, that people will interpret the world with the way they see it, and we have to keep churning out the stories. We must, with the, like Anmol mentioned, with the sensitivity and with kid gloves, and then leave it up to
But
the box.
I was quite
We've all mentioned this some at some point in the discussion, that there are typical, every genre has it. There are typical characters, characterizations, tropes, and stories, right, which are popular, and low-hanging fruits, so to speak. When you're trying to write something that will be loved within the genre. I mean, you can just look at the Korean dramas. For a lot of the progressive parts of society, which are cynical, they'll just look at all of these. This girl, swooning 50,000 times into this guy's arms, and he's macho, and he's a savior and virtuous and perfect women who's so sweet, and fairy tale endings, and we've fallen hook, line, and sinker for all of it, right? So a whole
I
lot of
have to
people are
confess, I have not seen a single Korean drama to date.
Oh
So
gosh, oh, you're the perfect person to speak to that. So, there's a lot of these that are still utilized in, romance writing, and it works. Who are we kidding? So, do you think these are still integral to the genre and can be contemporized? Do these need to change? Will audiences look at all of this differently? Or, will readers continue to respond to all of this?
before we move on to that, I actually want to touch on one more thing that you asked in your last question, which was about consent. And for me it was an interesting journey, because when the first book came out, and I remember I was at a lit fest in Mumbai, and somebody said, what about consent, do you think it's important? And I said, very bravely, I said, I'm not here to push the envelope. If I'm writing fiction, I'm writing fiction. I've got to write about my characters and what happens to them, you know but some years down the road, I think really feel that I think it's important that we build it in where we can. We must build it. And if consent, or if precautions weren't taken and things like that, let it be something which was a conscious choice, or a mistake that has or something that has a bearing on the story, and not just something where you forgot it as the author and it was not important enough to bring in. So that's the only thing where I feel like my stance has really changed. And I feel that these are small ways that we can push the envelope.
No, you're very right, because when we're talking about literature and film and cinema were always criticized, because it's soft power, but it's incredible power. So even the way you represent these kind of relationships and don't romanticize the fact that you're being chased and it's absolutely fine and you'll eventually give in, and there's so much, like
Yeah.
even the drama I was seeing, even though you don't see the dramas, K dramas, I see a bit of all of
Recommend
these
some
being
later.
applied. Yeah. He's constantly asking her, even though she's swooning 50,000 times into his arms, he's still asking her, it's all about you. And, I can see that they're trying to integrate it even within, very typical romance settings. Andaleeb and Anmol, would you care to comment?
I I'm sorry, I've like blanked out on the question. I'm just remembering these really cute romantic moments from dramas and movies.
Yeah, basically, why are they working? I mean, are these typical tropes and
Honestly,
they
even in
always find an audience?
so in a plain story, I mean, I think or yeah, I think it was in a plain story where the guy basically asked the girl, can I kiss you? And it's like that moment where you've reached the end and the kiss is like right at the end. And for some reason when I was writing that, I found that more romantic than the kiss itself. It's like when I saw the the reworking of Pride and Prejudice, there's this moment where Darcy helps Elizabeth get into the carriage, and it's an ungloved hand that he touches, and there's a very small shot of him, like just like clenching his hand, because just that small touch was enough to give him a spark. You could have grand gestures of running across airports, but that there's always a moment in everyone's love story where it's just a spark, it's just a very fleeting moment, and they suddenly feel, oh god, this is going to take months to get over. Now I'm completely in love. That moment, when it is captured on celluloid or in words, butterflies, instant butterflies in the stomach. And I think I've always been trying to chase that feeling. Am I
Sure.
making sense? Am I making sense?
Absolutely.
Think we're, as writers, we're trying to chase that, that feeling that we had when we read something, when we watched something that gave
Squeeze
you,
into the
you
pillow.
felt, yeah, you felt a certain way, and you want to recreate that for your readers. So, and I think those moments work well, because at the end of it, no matter um, how progressive things are going, at the end of it, that's the core of it, right? uh, we of course, all the stuff that we talked about, the consent and everything, and how it's so important to represent on in our books what we would like to see in the world. I mean, this may not be a true representation of the world. None of the men I write about are real, but there's no harm in writing and making them aspirational, making women decide that they're not going to settle for someone and they want someone like this, which is, I think in a way is slowly and very quietly changing the world. Instead of, I think especially girls from my community, they are always geared towards settling for whatever happens in their lives, and I'm trying to write all these racy romances and trying to make them demand more, expect more from their lives.
A total stranger could kind of fall in love with you and care about you, and then you wonder, they see you in a totally new light, in ways that you've never seen yourself before. And that heady feeling is what we're trying to put down and completely cement in words. Yeah, romance is.
If I could add one thing to that, another example, I was watching this show called Heartstopper, and
I was
that,
going to Heartstopper.
and I'm saying, Anmol, that thing when you talked about the heady feeling, the writing is really, I mean, when I say I'm going to watch this show, I've basically decided I'm watching a romance. And so the fact that this is about one bisexual character, one gay character, a spectrum of, other, there is a sister who is lesbian, and all of it is still incidental to the fact that I'm settling down to watch a good romance. And so again, there is a scene where between the two boys, and when he says, "May I kiss you?" and I have that, finally, finally moment, that I'm waiting for it to happen. Will they show it, or will it just be, touched upon? I mean, I want to now go through that whole experience, which is really what we're buying into in the romance, and I think that even therefore the fact that, whether it's young adults, whether it's adult, whether it's Shabana Azmi and Dharmender in Rocky or Rani or whatever, at the end of the day, we're just enjoying maybe something that we can't have in life, or maybe we want to relive something that we had, or whatever, that sense of what the that awe feeling that romance gives you.
Yeah, beautiful.
I have an awe feeling all over now. So I think after this discussion, I'm going to go right. We must stop. But thank you so much, guys, for being so honest and being so insightful. And we can all agree that changed or frozen in time, romance is in the air and here to stay in whatever form. And I think all of us are old school panelists here. So me, it's
I hope every publisher in the
Milan is
world
the
is watching
youngest,
this.
you know. Milan
Yeah,
is the
please.
youngest. She should have actually told you what all the research she used to do. You
Oh
know,
gosh. No, but thank
I
you so
mean,
much.
you
And
had some, you were on some dating app or something, remember, just for the research purposes.
Who,
And I was
me?
like, that's
Me?
amazing. I remember you
Yeah,
telling me
yeah.
sometime, yeah. So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that
I was
level of,
writing it.
which
And
one
then,
were you on, Milan?
huh?
Which
I
one did
went
you
on
do?
all, and it was off. It was quite awful because after a few initial, text messages, I had to come clean and say that, look, I'm researching this for a screenplay, and I spent a year of my life
Yes, you're
writing
my
that
lab
screenplay.
rat.
It turned out to be one of those things you put down to bad experience, eventually, which somebody's whatever, it finally became a ghostwriting experience. But I certainly am now deeply experienced in dating apps.
Oh wow! Can you
yeah,
on a
we should
good
have
note?
actually talked about this. I thought you were
Yeah,
going to mention it.
seriously.
That's why I didn't bring it up.
Interesting.
Oh really? Okay, now I know who to go to if my husband's misbehaving. I'm just gonna take
I
the
have,
time
I have
to
even I have even had to tell friends about people I saw on those dating apps.
Oh,
So
that's
yeah,
interesting.
it can get quite tricky.
That's a book.
The story is there as well. Future
Wonderful.
stories.
And we will cover dating apps in our next session for sure. And for now, thank you so much and hope you have a great evening. And yes, here's to romance.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
having us.
Thank you,
Bye-bye,
Richa.
Thank
Milan.
you for having us.
Thank you,
Thank you so
everyone.
much.